What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today it's finally the MCU Spider-Man Trilogy overview. And for the live-action Spider-Man films, we've really went through a journey. We went through the Raimi Trilogy, then we went through the failed Amazing Spider-Man Cinematic Universe, and now today we are gonna go through the MCU Spider-Man Trilogy. So obviously, where I left things off in the old overview, basically, Sony messed up. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 didn't do that well, and they were contemplating, do they do another reboot, or do they continue to expand the cinematic universe? They ultimately decided to meet up with Marvel and ultimately decide to share the rights to Spider-Man, not sell it completely, but share the rights to the Spider-Man character. Now, obviously, we could talk about what Sony did after with the Venom movies and what have you, but those are going to be a separate overview that I'm not going to do this week. I want to save it, especially for when Craven comes out, so we can really see how Sony has went off the rails a little bit with their plans of wanting a shared cinematic universe with Spider-Man outside of the MCU, but they realized at the time anyway, Spider-Man needed to be in the MCU in order to save themselves. And let's be real here, even though Amazing Spider-Man fans are going to hate me, the MCU Spider-Man trilogy speaks for itself on why that was a good business decision for Sony, as each film did better than any Amazing Spider-Man film probably ever, to be honest with you, and still do better than some of the spin-off stuff that Sony does. But at the same time, I think Sony's finding their own way, and obviously when we get to the final film, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, on the way to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, we're obviously going to see the journey of the 9 Spider-Man movies. I think we have fully went through. I don't think it's 9. I think it's 10 at this point. I think Spider-Verse Across the Spider-Verse makes it 10 movies, but we're going through the journey of the 9 movies building up to the 10th one. All right. But anyways, how's the third reboot, which is now, as far as we know, the fastest reboot for anything. Like, this is the fastest reboot in cinema history. As I said, Amazing Spider-Man originally held that record. That had a little bit of distance between 2007 and 2012, but at the time it was still considered pretty fast to do a reboot. But MCU Spider-Man and The Amazing Spider-Man only is a 2-year gap. So let's go through the MCU Spider-Man trilogy movies and let's just see if I still like them or not. Damn, that chair is super squeaky. But anyways, let's get started with Spider-Man Homecoming. And look, whether you like this movie or not really just kind of shows how you felt about MCU Spider-Man, at least in the beginnings. Now, for context, this is actually not MCU Spider-Man's first movie. His first movie was Captain America Civil War, which came out a year prior to Spider-Man Homecoming. So that's why I say it's a 2-year, not a 3-year, but it still would be the fastest reboot no matter when they decide to introduce Spider-Man in the universe. And he is a high school kid that Tony Stark recruits to be on Team Iron Man, which, if you know Spider-Man's character, he's kind of not. I mean, yeah, sure, he joined Team Iron Man in Civil War, and I thought they were going to do a whole he's going to turn, but overall, just as an introduction to his character, it was a pretty good introduction. And Spider-Man Homecoming was going to build on that introduction because it was going to be his first standalone film. So, a lot being said, Spider-Man Homecoming, we gotta go through the cast, we gotta go through the side characters, and I gotta say that MCU Spider-Man probably has a more memorable side cast of characters than the Amazing Spider-Man films. Most likely because they're a little bit more recurring, but also, like, as I said, they're more consistent throughout the trilogy. And I think that's what makes the side cast of Spider-Man, the home trilogy, I guess you could say, far better than the Amazing Spider-Man duology, because side characters that I thought were great, like Flash Thompson, didn't really stick around, and also, there were a lot of other side characters outside of Peter, well, not Peter himself, but outside of Gwen and Aunt May and all that. But anyways, and Captain Stacy, and again, half of those side characters didn't even last in the first movie, or they just didn't return for the second one. But for Spider-Man Homecoming, where we're breaking down the side characters, there's a lot of mini side characters that we could talk about. We could talk about how Betty Brant this time is a teenager that works for the school news, and she has her own partner or co-host of the school news. They are throughout the trilogy, but Betty has a bigger role in the second movie, so So we're gonna kind of talk about that because Far From Home, we're gonna get to it. But anyways, you do have these robust characters, and obviously, this is the first one where Peter Parker actually has a guy in the chair. Now, sure, in the Raimi trilogy, he was supposed to be best friends with Harry Osborn, but we all know that relationship didn't really end out that well. They kind of went through their own arc, but there's not really an arc here with Ned. Ned is Peter's best friend and guy in the chair, and that's what he is consistently throughout that trilogy. So in a way, the MCU Spider-Man movies are very just consistent with the characters. And it depends on if you really like these characters or not. For me, Ned, I don't like Ned in these movies. I mean, he was kind of funny in the beginning, but like, when we get to the other movies, I just don't really care for Ned as a character. You also have MJ, played by Zendaya, and MJ is very interesting because you can obviously tell they were going to race bend Mary Jane Watson, and that Zendaya was going to play the Mary Jane Watson. But I think they got so much heat and so much backlash from just the idea online of Zendaya playing Mary Jane that they quote unquote created a brand new character called Michelle Jones, who is totally not Mary Jane, but at No Way Home, they decided to give her the Watson last name. Also, it's Zendaya. You think they're going to drop Zendaya from the Spider-Man franchise the way this ends? No, they're not. So you do have MJ, and you have Flash Thompson, which, yes, this is the first Flash Thompson cinematically that has actually stuck around for the entire trilogy of movies, but this is a Flash Thompson that is kind of, he's not the traditional Flash Thompson. And again, I could understand the approach, and Tony Revolori is a good actor. He's actually great in things. But I did not really care for his Flash either in this movie. I'm like, Peter, why are you getting bullied by Flash? I feel like if Peter just kind of had a spine, and I get it, that's not the point, but like, I mean, you could really have a spine. You don't need your spider powers to have a spine against Flash. Then I don't think he would get bullied that much. So yes, I understand the perspective. They wanted a quote unquote modern bully, but like it just didn't work for me. I felt flat, and you could feel that for a lot of Spider-Man Homecoming. There are some other characters like Liz. She's pretty great in the movie, and actually Michelle Jones is not the main love interest. She's just kind of a side character that has an appearance here or there. So Zendaya, she does good at the end. She just really pops up every now and then for a running joke, and then at the end she has the reveal of, my name is Michelle Jones, but my friends call me MJ, which is obviously a nod to Mary Jane, but they were just scared that because she's black that they were going to get backlash for race bending Mary Jane, but it's obviously Mary Jane. It's very clear that's what they were going with, that's kind of the direction they were taking her character, but they just kind of backtracked because they were scared. But Liz Allen is, as I said, is the main love interest, and I actually liked her as the main love interest for Peter, and there's a big debate about whether or not Peter suffers consequences and stuff. And I actually understand both perspectives. And although I actually, spoilers, like this movie, I think it's still a really good movie. I can understand why some people were kind of turned off. They don't like Peter being an Avenger and all that. But at the same time, when you look at Spider-Man Homecoming, that's kind of the point. That Peter, after getting a taste of being with the Avengers, he wants more of it, but he has to learn that he is just not ready for an Avengers thing yet. He's not at that level yet. For now, he has to take care of the little guys, and he has to support the smaller communities. And I kind of like that message, but at the same time, it does kind of contradict how Peter was in Civil War, like let alone the comics, but just in Civil War, where he was a kid that loved school. He loved school and all this stuff, and I think the Russos got Peter perfectly. And then on top of that, you have Peter, who is in Homecoming. He does not care about school. He wants to only be an Avenger, to the point where he's even willing to drop out of school just to be an Avenger. And I can understand that, that's a total whiplash to who Peter Parker was just a few months ago. And I get it. He wants a taste of the Avengers, but that was so drastic there. But then there is a big component. I didn't even talk about Aunt May, but out of all of these movies, Aunt May is just such a non-factor in these movies, man. Especially when we get to the second one, and um, I love the casting of I love the casting of Marissa Tomei as Aunt May. I don't think she was the problem, but I think she could have pulled off Aunt May very well. But the problem is that they don't do much with her. There's a whole scene where, oh yeah, Aunt May's hot. That's kind of the running joke of the movie, and she is supportive to Peter. And I wanted, that's what I wanted. I wanted more of their relationship, especially since it actually took the approach that I said. What if the Amazing Spider-Man took this approach of having it just be a couple months after Uncle Ben has died, and what Peter is kind of at the mindset of, but I can understand why for people it's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to feel bad for your father, well, not father, but for your Uncle Ben dying. There's not really a lot of mentions of it. I mean, it's heavily hinted, but again, they didn't want to touch Uncle Ben because the previous two iterations have already did that, so they didn't want to redo it for this movie. And yeah, I could absolutely understand that because on rewatch, probably one of the two of the biggest criticized things about these movies, before we get into more of the positives, is the influence of Iron Man. And especially in the first two movies, this is a big problem for MCU Spider-Man, that he cannot get out of the shadow of Iron Man, to the point where some fans even called him Iron Boy Jr. And look, I still enjoy Tom Holland's Spider-Man, and actually I don't even think Robert Downey Jr. is in the movie that much. I think he probably has a very small presence in the movie, but again, having Tony save him and then having this over tech suit that has a bunch of web combinations, and he even has his own AI in the suit. It's too high tech for Peter. It's too high tech for Spider Man. And I do not like my Spider Man that high tech unless I have an exception. Unless it's Spider Man 2099 or it's the Iron Spider, or he's actually building his own tech, but he's not even building his own tech in this movie. It's just Tony doing a modification of what Peter kind of started out with. But hey, Peter at least created his own web fluid, so that's kind of good, I guess. But anyways, let's get into more of the positives. And I like that this is more of a small scale Spider-Man movie. When we compare the other Spider-Man films on this list of the Amazing Spider-Man or the Raimi trilogy, they always went for the bigger scale. And I think for the Amazing Spider-Man, that actually hurt the movie. That at the third act, they went for the bigger scale. Like, oh, New York is all going to be, infected by lizards. So the whole city in these previous two Spider-Man movies were always in danger. Whether you have Green Goblin, whether they kill a bunch of civilians, or you have Doc Ock that's going to create a nuclear sun that's going to destroy the whole city, or you have Venom and Sandman running amok in the city and messing it up, and Spider-Man has to clean it up. But this is small scale. This is Spider-Man stopping a local crime in the case of the MCU world from happening, and that is these guys using these high-tech alien technology to rob people. Well, not rob people, but just sell as weapons, and these weapons are being dangerously used. And so Peter's trying to track that down. And I actually quite like that storyline. It's a breath of fresh air when you're going through these Spider-Man movies and you're like, oh, this is a more small scale story. But at the same time, that's why a lot of Spider-Man fans were like, I don't like this movie because it's too small scale. And again, I appreciated that was small scale. It was a little bit more centered. It was him focusing on Queens, focusing on him trying to protect his neighborhood from these terrible things. Even a cameo by Donald Glover has Miles Morales' uncle. Now, we don't get to see any other Miles Morales familia or even Miles in the rest of this trilogy, but it's kind of cool that Donald Glover is technically the Prowler, and he is in the MCU. So if they ever want to bring back Donald Glover into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they can bring him back as the Prowler for MCU Spider-Man 4, but that's if he's not busy with the Hippo Hustler. And the Vulture is a great villain. I think Vulture was the beginning of the MCU as a franchise starting to have good villains. And I think Vulture, along with Ego, were very good villains. Vulture's motivation is clear. He's doing this to provide for for his daughter, I should say, and his family, and all of that, and the conversation him and Peter has, and even the scene of Peter lifting up the rubble and saying, I'm Spider-Man, as he tries to, power himself up, realizing he can't have help. He can't expect somebody to help him all the time. So I actually really enjoyed that. So yes, Spider-Man Homecoming, in a way, has its issues. It does have the drivances of an MCU formula a little bit in there of what the MCU wanted to do, but I felt like they were steering Spider-Man in the right direction at the end of the movie, especially in the third act. That, okay, we kind of took a little bit of a detour here, but this is where we want Spider-Man to be. At least that's what John wanted Spider-Man to be, where he's a little bit more independent, he's more small scale, he's helping the community a little bit, because the other Spider-Man films did not have other superheroes running around in their world. And this version of Spider-Man has Iron Man, Captain America, Vision, Black Panther. You have a bunch of Marvel heroes that are just existing in this universe. And so it's nice that they're like, well, wait a minute, Spider-Man does not have to be the same way as these guys, because that was getting repetitive in our own franchise. So let's switch it up. Let's make Spider-Man more small scale, more for the community, and more street level, which is where the direction they were going. Until the Russos were like, forget that, we're going to give him the Iron Spider suit, and we're going to make him an Avenger, and it's like, that's kind of the difficultness of having a Spider-Man in a shared universe. You have one director that has a clear direction to where to take Spider-Man in his trilogy, and then just in case they want Spider-Man in an upcoming crossover movie, they could just kind of retroactively kind of undo that, which is why on rewatch going through MCU Spider-Man's journey was a little bit more frustrating. I mean, I still like Tom Holland as Spider-Man. I think he nails he nails Peter Parker to an extent. He nails Peter Parker. I don't think Peter Parker is like this super. I mean, he's a pessimist, but so he's not this super. I mean, he is hopeful to an extent, but he's a little bit more pessimistic. But I think he nailed Peter Parker, and I think he actually nailed Spider-Man very well with the quips and stuff. But overall, I think Spider-Man Homecoming is an 8 out of 10. It's a fun and breezy movie. It's nothing too serious, but if you are expecting a little bit something more serious from a Spider-Man movie, I don't know if Spider-Man Homecoming is for you. And again, that's where the divide kind of came in for Spidey fans after Homecoming. A lot of them liked the direction, like I did, with where they were taking Spider-Man, at least towards the end of the movie. And a lot of them just hated the entire direction they were just taking Spider-Man. And although I understand both sides of the equation, I still think that Spider-Man Homecoming is still a pretty solid Spidey movie. It's not the best Spider-Man movie of all time. Like, don't get it twisted. But it is still just a fun Spider-Man movie. And I mean, after like 5 of these Spider-Man films, it's nice for one to just be a little bit more small scaled. But Far From Home should have upped the ante, and that's my problem with Far From Home. They upped the ante in the wrong aspects of this trilogy. Far From Home, so this is way after Endgame, so this is post-Endgame, and I am going to emphasize it because it's a lot more in this movie than in the other films, but I hate the Iron Spider suit. I think the Iron Spider suit is horrible. It's ugly looking. I just did not like the feel of the Iron Spider suit. I hated it. It looked kind of cool in Homecoming at the end where they kind of teased it. And it looked good in some shots in Infinity War, but in Endgame and especially in Far From Home, it looks horrible. It looks very bad. And I don't like Peter. Oh, I mean, yes, every fan's going to be like, but wait a minute. Peter, who would have used the Iron Spider suit? Yes, I understand it. But, like, come on. Peter using such a high-tech suit. Again, it's like we're kind of going back on what Homecoming was trying to do. But anyways, I agreed with the direction that, okay, now after Endgame, Spider-Man does need to start to step up to become a bigger superhero. But Peter has been a little bit too comfortable being kind of the small-scale hero, helping the community and stuff. But after Endgame, he wants to take a break. After the big battle and seeing Tony Stark die, he wants to take a break from being Spider-Man just for a little bit. But instead of like, oh, he wants it for PTSD, it's because I think that was also the route they were going, but they leaned more into the he just wants to get MJ, which whatever. Let's talk about Betty Brant in this version of Spider-Man. Now, obviously, we only really got to see Betty in the Sam Raimi trilogy, and it's not like she was a big character or anything, but she fit her role pretty well, being the assistant to J. Jonah Jameson. And here, as I said, they changed her to a high school student that works for the school news, but I guess this is comic accurate. They make her and Ned date each other, but the problem with Ned, which I didn't really emphasize in this, is that he's like Gog. And if you know your Miles Morales, Gog is Spider-Man, or why did I say Gog? Genki. Goddamn. What the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with me today? But Genki is Miles' best friend, but they kind of took Ned Leeds, who was a completely different character, and they made him Genki, and they just gave it to Peter Parker. And also another misconception is that Ned Leeds is the Hobgoblin, when actually Ned Leeds was framed to be Hobgoblin in the comics. He didn't actually become Hobgoblin. Somebody else was completely Hobgoblin. So those are two misconceptions about Ned. Ned is more like a Gog. Why am I saying Gog again? It's Genki. It's Genki. God damn it. But he's more like a Genki to Peter Parker. And, they don't really do much with him. They decide to make him and Betty date, and it's just kind of this joke, like, we're just lovers, man. But yeah, for me, this is where the humor did not hit that much, which makes sense because the writers of this wrote Ant-Man and the Wasp, the second one. And Ant-Man and the Wasp is one of my least favorite MCU movies. So it makes sense that their type of humor did not work with me when it came to this movie. And yeah, this is my second least favorite Spider-Man movie. I think out of this entire watch through, there were only 2 Spider-Man movies where I was like, I did not really vibe with what they were doing here, or at least were trying to do here. And the main plot of the glasses and Edith, again, I understand what they were trying to do. They're trying to make Peter Parker level up to become a bigger hero in the MCU, which is the direction I agree with. I think the sequel should have did that, but I think the whole Edith glasses, Tony creating these Edith glasses to give it to Peter, I didn't think, like, why would he want to give it to Peter Parker out of anybody? If he was to ever create it, why not give it to somebody like Rhodey or Pepper, somebody from his branch that are adults and he knows could be more responsible with it than even he would be with Edith. But nah, he decides to give it to a 16 or 17-year-old kid. I forgot how old Peter is at the time of this movie. But also the blip kind of comes into play. So Peter's a little bit more, he should be more older, but he's blipped. So whatever. But anyways, making all his classmates get blipped, I didn't really care for that. I know a lot of people were annoyed. And sure, they could have played around with some characters not being blipped and other characters being blipped. And we've already experienced of the non-blipped people. But they're gonna want to keep the cast. They're not gonna want to boot anybody off, so it kind of made sense here. And Flash Thompson, there was a funny joke. I mean, it's low brow humor, but he just keeps getting hit in the balls, or he just got hit in the balls. I was just kind of dying of laughter out of that, not because of like, oh yeah, it was so funny, but just like Flash was such a dickhead to him. But they don't even let Flash be Flash in this movie. I mean, sure, he's kind of a dickhead to Peter, but not that much, because the real arch nemesis Peter has to go up against is Brad. That's right, Brad. And I was like, why wouldn't you just give that position to Flash Thompson? And also in the comics, I think, I could be wrong. I think, well, I don't know if Flash and Mary Jane dated. I don't think so. I know Harry and Mary Jane dated in the comics, but I don't know if Flash and Mary Jane dated. But they could have did something like the Raimi trilogy where Flash and Mary Jane are dating, but she's MJ now. She's not Mary Jane. But you get the point where Flash is also interested in MJ. Just give Flash something better to do. But Flash is just kind of there. And there's another funny joke. Just like all the Flash jokes were funny to me because of just how messed up it was. Where his butler comes to pick him up at the airport. He's like, his mom and papa couldn't come to pick me up. They're like, nah, they're busy. Basically that they don't care about their kid. And it kind of gave some character insight. Like, okay, the reason why Flash acts like this is because his parents neglect him. But it's not really even that explored. It's actually kind of ignored, so they don't really kind of care about that at all. And it's just like Brad was just more annoying. I mean, he's better than Paul, I'll say that. Paul in the Spider-Man comics, he's bad, but Brad, whatever. And you have the Nick Fury stuff. Now, I did not mind this. I actually did not mind Spider-Man Nick Fury crossing over, because it did happen in the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. It happened where Peter and Nick Fury, there was a good relationship between them. And in this movie, it was fine, but obviously you could tell Nick Fury wasn't acting like Nick Fury in this movie. But actually, that was supposed to be intentional because, spoilers, Talos the Skrull was impersonating Nick Fury the whole time, and Nick Fury's off doing something else in space, which we're probably gonna learn about in the Secret Invasion show. So, do you see what I'm talking about? Where the other Spider-Man movies live in their own vacuum, but MCU Spider-Man is a little different. It's connected to other properties with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but that's fine because we wanted Spider-Man in the MCU. Just people didn't like the characterization they picked for Peter. But in this, I was like, they have a good arc for Peter, but I felt like the choices they went with were wrong. And although I do understand why they did Globetrotting to be a little bit different, to freshen up the pace, because the other movies were so in New York, but that's kind of the DNA of Spider-Man, that he's in New York. And I felt like actually Homecoming didn't do more of Peter in New York, like him being in the city and stuff. We actually have never seen MCU Spider-Man really just swing in the city until like the end of Far From Home. So I would have actually liked if we got more of that, more of him in the city. I think this plot didn't really need to be so international like they wanted. This could have been kept in New York. And the reason why I say that is because I feel like this movie should have focused more on Peter and Aunt May's relationship. You're telling me Aunt May doesn't care that her nephew is Spider-Man, where she finds out at the end of the movie, of Homecoming, I should say. She finds out that he's Spider-Man, and she freaks out. And in the next movie, she's just chill. Peter's doing events with her, has Spider-Man. She's high-fiving him in the Iron Spider suit, and they have this old dumb romantic subplot with her and Happy, which I did not care for. But I feel like in order for us to care more about Aunt May and for us to really feel the gravity of being Spider-Man for Peter, Aunt May should have been a little bit more protective of Peter, especially after, since he got blipped. He got blipped. There was a point in time. Well, I mean, she also got blipped, but I thought that was also another mistake with the story. I think they should have made Aunt May be one of the few people that actually survived a blip, that went through the 5 years. Like, what were those 5 years for her that Peter was just gone, and it was related to him being Spider-Man if she put her foot down. But no, Aunt May actually encourages him to be Spider-Man when he doesn't want to be Spider-Man. I feel like the way they should have handled the story is that Peter, although he wants to take a break, knows he can, so he's putting more pressure on himself to be Spider-Man, because Peter's never going to realistically just want to give up being Spider-Man and willingly do it. But Aunt May would have did it. It felt so weird. It felt like these characters were flipped positions, and there was never that point where Peter and May came to that agreement, like, I'm okay with you being Spider-Man. Because, again, to be different from the other two, this version of Aunt May knows that he's Spider-Man, but they don't actually use that storyline potential well or at all. So it's just kind of like, oh, okay, she knows that he's Spider-Man and she's okay with it. Okay? Like, she's just okay with him being Spider-Man. Whatever. Fine. One last thing, Mysterio. Jake Gyllenhaal is great in this movie. I liked him as Mysterio. I think Jake Gyllenhaal killed it in his performance as Mysterio. I loved Mysterio, the presentation, the scene, where the whole trippy scene. I think, because that's why I was debating. Because The Amazing Spider-Man 2 overall, just the entire movie, is visually the best looking live action Spider-Man movie. But Far From Home has moments where it is the best visually looking Spider-Man live action film. Like the whole the whole trippy sequence of Mysterio to Peter, like the whole fight that they have with him, and that whole sequence, you know what I'm talking about, where it's all these illusions that Spider-Man's going through and Mysterio's just kind of messing with him, or kind of in the final battle where Peter's kind of fighting the drones and he goes inside the drones and it's just this beautiful shot of him being inside of the drones and all that stuff. I mean, I actually like the third act. I think the action in Far From Home actually improved in the action of Homecoming, something I didn't say there, where I thought the action, although it was intentionally lackluster, was still lackluster in that movie and was not really that great, which was another criticism people that didn't really care for this version of Spider-Man kind of had. And In Far From Home, the action was better. The action was way better. Peter was fighting Mysterio. The whole scene where he uses his spider sense to kind of block off the drones was badass. It was actually a scene where I was like, damn, this is badass, Peter. You're actually like kicking his ass. But then they also ruined it with a joke calling it the Peter Tingle, which, I mean, yeah, it's a small thing, whatever. They don't call it spider sense. It is what it is. But at the same time, it's kind of stuff like that that turns people off. That are like, you see, they're just turning everything into a joke. And I feel like the writers of Ant-Man and the Wasp really did that. I know a lot of people point to Guardians of the Galaxy as the main point of all the MCU movies just being super jokey, but the Guardians of the Galaxy movies actually balance the jokes with the sense of, darkness to it. There was a little bit of character with how the characters would joke, like how Rocket would kind of do throwaway jokes, how that kind of ties into his character. So yeah, they were jokes, but they were more character based jokes that worked for those certain characters. But the MCU didn't get that part, and they just got super jokey jokes. And Ant-Man and the Wasp and Spider-Man Far From Home were some of the worst when it comes to like non-stop jokes or whatever. And then even the scene with him and Happy where he's like, you'll never be Iron Man. They're finally like, yes, this version of Spider-Man is not supposed to be the next version of Iron Man. And then they play the freaking Iron Man song. I think it's called Iron Man, right? But it's the song from Iron Man. I forgot the name of it. No, it's not Iron Man. It's not. The song name isn't Iron Man. But it is a song from Iron Man. If you know it, you know it. I think it's in the beginning. You know the song. You know the song. And I was like, and then he's making his suit, quote unquote, but it's just using Stark tech. And I was like, and he's making it like Tony, and Happy's looking at him like he's Tony. And it didn't work for me because I was like, their whole point is that he's not the next Iron Man, only for you to make a whole scene where he's acting exactly like Iron Man. And obviously, there's a big part of the movie I missed, Peter and MJ's romance. It was fine. I don't know if it's better than the Raimi trilogy romance. Maybe a little bit. Maybe because it's less toxic. Because I don't really have a read on MJ in these first two movies. Like, she's there. She definitely has a more prominent role because there's a whole love triangle between her, Brad, and Peter. And at the end, she does end up with Peter because she does like him. And for me, it makes sense that MJ likes Peter. It made sense. Homecoming, you can make the argument she was kind of following him or whatever. You could make an argument that in Homecoming there were some signs of MJ kind of liking Peter. And in Far From Home, there are heavy signs that she likes Peter. But Peter liking MJ came out of nowhere. Like, it came out of nowhere. Because in Homecoming, it wasn't like, oh yeah, Peter, main love interest is Liz. But he might have some feelings for MJ. Like, he found MJ to be just more weird. I wouldn't say creepy. I don't think he thought she was creepy. But he just found MJ to be a little weird and kind of a dick to him. But, like, in this one, he's head over heels for MJ. And it's like, it's such a total shift. It's such a whiplash from the first movie of how he saw MJ and how he sees MJ in this movie. And obviously, you have the big end credit scene where J.K. Simmons returns as J. Jonah Jameson because he's perfect casting for J. Jonah Jameson. And honestly, nobody else as of right now could do damn near as good of a job as him as J. Jonah Jameson in live action because nobody else has attempted to. In the Amazing Spider-Man films, I think, actually was going to make Ice Cube J. Jonah Jameson, but he didn't want to because he was like, I'm either Spider-Man or I'm not doing it. But hey, maybe he might have a spot in Spider-Verse. Maybe he could be a Spider-Man in that. But now, but anyways, he kind of drops the reveal that Peter Parker is Spider-Man because Mysterio kind of leaked that information. But overall, Far From Home, for me, is very lackluster. It's a 6 out of 10 because of the action. Like, the parts that are really good about the movie are really good, but there's just a lot of stuff that is lackluster. I was borderline pushing it to a 5, but the third act was good, so I was like, it's just meh. It's not like Amazing Spider-Man 2 where I was like, oh man, these are just garbage decisions. Like, you had really good stuff in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, but then you have something that was just so bad. That was really bad. Here, it's like, it was just mediocre. It was just meh. I didn't like it. It was very mid. But could Spider-Man No Way Home save the MCU Spider-Man trilogy for me? This is probably one of the most beloved Spider-Man movies of all time. And I like No Way Home. I like the first time it came out, I loved it. I thought it was top tier MCU. I think for 1 minute, I almost thought it was my favorite Spider-Man movie. But after a while, I kind of toned it down. It has dropped off a little bit because nothing can really touch Guardians for me. But No Way Home is still good. There are still some elements. I think the Ant-Man and the Wasp writers improved in No Way Home. But, it was still a little bit jokey. The first 30 minutes had me a little scared because it was like same old MCU Spider-Man shtick. Peter makes a stupid decision. This time, he, instead of just asking Doctor Strange, hey, Doctor Strange, make everybody forget about the Mysterio broadcast, he just tells Doctor Strange, hey, Doctor Strange, tell everybody to forget I'm Spider-Man. And then he messes up the spell, and then somehow that destroys the multiverse because they were using time and stuff. And now they have to collect the old Spider-Man villains from the past and from different universes, like it's Pokemon. So in a way, No Way Home was kind of like the build up to all the live action Spider-Man movies. In a way, it's kind of the oh my god, this was the big crescendo moment of all the live action movies. It was everything the live action movies have been building up to, except having freaking Scorpion. Whoops. But anyways, you have all the nostalgic villains back. So villains wise, it's really like Green Goblin's still great. Green Goblin is probably the best villain of the movie. But at the same time, yes, I did love that Green Goblin killed Aunt May. Not because I hate Aunt May, but because it gives Peter like, oh shit, this is personal. But I felt like I should have felt her death more. Like I felt bad for Peter. I felt bad for him. But I didn't feel her death because the previous two movies didn't do much with her character. So when she died, I mean, she was at her best in this movie. And I honestly, it's not Marissa Tomei's fault. It's the writing. I wish they treated Aunt May a little better in these two movies. I think Sally Field, who did The Amazing Spider-Man Aunt May, they did well with her. Even though she had smaller scenes. But they really treated Aunt May very well in the Amazing Spider-Man movies. And they treated Aunt May very well in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. And it's not like I want Aunt May to take over. Like, I want Aunt May to have all the screen time. But I don't feel that they did much with Aunt May as a character. There are some parts in Homecoming where I was like, oh, she's good. But by the time she died, yeah. But obviously, when she died, that was the turning point of the movie. The apartment fight is probably top 5 MCU fights for me. Like, see Spider-Man, see Peter fight Green Goblin in the apartment, and then you have all the villains just kind of out there. You have Electro shooting Doc Ock from out of the apartment complex, and then you just see Peter and Green Goblin beat the crap out of each other. Like, this was the first time where we were seeing Spider-Man throw, like, well, I mean, he did throw some legit punches at Mysterio, but that was towards the end. And, throughout the MCU Spider-Man movies, these were not superpowered people. These were just humans. These were regular people using technology. But you have Peter go up against somebody that's a little bit not human, that's a little bit more, I guess you could say super soldier. It's not the right term, but who is a little bit more modified, who's a I don't want to say inhuman because the terms to use for, I will just say superpowered person. When you have a superpowered person go up against Peter, it's a little bit more interesting. Like his fight with Doc Ock on the bridge with the Iron Spider. I wanted Doc Ock to destroy the Iron Spider suit so badly. I wanted him to tear it apart. But it was a little cute joke where he's like, oh, you have your own arms. Ooh. The movie also sometimes does rely a little bit on too much nostalgia, a little bit. And obviously, the decision with Doctor Strange and Peter is stupid to kind of get the movie going. But overall, I thought it was still, there were some parts that were a little weak when you rewatch it. But then, again, as I said, the second half of the movie is like a different breed. This is it's like, oh shit. We get to play with all the toys from the live action Spider-Man movies, and then they really start doing that. So I'm going to go through all the villains, and I'm only criticizing them for how they are in the movie. So if I was to rank it, in last place is the Lizard. Like I said in the Amazing Spider-Man overview, the Lizard is just a joke. in this movie. It's kind of like he wants to turn everybody into a lizard, and they kind of make fun of him. I mean, hell, he doesn't even have the dignity to have his own scene where he gets captured. Like every other villain gets their own scene. Doc Ock gets his own scene. Green Goblin gets an awesome intro, like on the bridge, and you have him laughing maniacally as he goes through the smoke, and Peter is just seeing him for the first time. And you have the Electro sequence, which was cool. Even Sandman had a cool intro. But Lizard, oh yeah, Doctor Strange just kind of caught him somewhere in the sewer. And yeah. Like it's like the lizard, it's like they wanted the lizard there for the sake of it. And that was the frustrating thing. It's like they didn't go it was obvious they wanted to do Sinister Six, but I think Sony held them back from doing Sinister Six because I think Sony wants to create their own. And again, we're gonna talk about that later on down the line about Sony's plans with their Spider-Verse. So I guess they didn't want the MCU to beat them to the punch when it comes to the Sinister Six. So we had the Sinister Five, and it's like they wanted Lizard there because they wanted a recognizable villain for Andrew Garfield Spider-Man to have that represents the Amazing Spider-Man, but they didn't really have much for his character. Then you have Sandman, who was great in Spider-Man 3, but he doesn't really have much to do here. They couldn't even get the actor back, so he's just in his sand form, and he wants to go back to his universe because of his daughter. And then the reason he turns evil. It's like they didn't like Sandman and Lizard, they didn't really try with. Like those were like afterthoughts. They were just kind of there to make the action look cool, and they served their purpose, but when you're looking at their characters, you're like, meh. But obviously the main highlights was Electro, Doc Ock, and especially Green Goblin. In fact, this just becomes Green Goblin's movie. Green Goblin is the main villain of this whole movie. He kills Aunt May. He pushes Peter, like MCU Peter's buttons to the point where we've never seen him like that before. We never see him get to the point of just pure anger to where the final battle he is just beating the shit out of Green Goblin. He's beating the fuck out of him. Like, by pure rage, he's almost about to kill him. And Toby Spider-Man has to stop him. But we're going to get into the other Spider-Man a little later. But the third act, I don't know if this is hyperbole, but I think this has the best third act out of any Spider-Man movie. Like, including Into the Spider-Verse. But Into the Spider-Verse is just a different breed. Into the Spider-Verse gets to get away with more in action. But in terms of the third act and how it's set up and the whole final battle and all the cool moments, this is the best third act. Also, I guess another con could be the way they handled Doctor Strange in this movie a little bit. I mean, as I said, there's a time where Peter boots him out of the movie because he's like, yo, this is my solo movie, Doctor Strange. Stop hogging up the time. But nah, for real, Doctor Strange is like, they have to die. It's the great calculus of the multiverse. And Peter's like, well, fuck that. I'm going to try to cure them, which is kind of weird because it's like, is that going to cause a paradox in the Raimi trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man duology? I mean, I don't think so for Dr. Connors, but like, what happens if Electro comes back, and what are the ramifications for the Raimi trilogy? Like, Doc Ock returns to the universe and he's healed, so what happens now? What happens to Doc Ock? What happens to Green Goblin, who his death was a big significant part of the Raimi trilogy? And is it more like, do they go back to the current present of those universes, or do they kind of just go back to the point where they die? And how does that affect the Raimi trilogy? Because Harry's dead, so what is Norman's reaction going to be to that? Like, so there's a lot of things where it's like, when you really start thinking about the after effects, yeah, it's a little drastic. But as I said, No Way Home is very strong when it becomes a Spider-Man movie. And as I said, the second half is so strong, like the scene where Toby and Andrew show up. Now, in the theater, these were amazing scenes. At home, it feels like a TV studio set where you're waiting for the applause. Like, they have the side applaud, and they're just waiting for it. Like, you can tell they have that pause. And this is more of a problem for the MCU as of late. Well, not as of late. I think they kind of knocked it off a little bit after Doctor Strange. But they have these scenes where the crowd's supposed to applaud, because in Infinity War and Endgame, the crowds were going bananas for those movies. But those moments were earned. Those moments weren't like, all right, we're going to pause for the crowd to erupt. But they were just scenes that were so good that the crowd erupted. and they were so well timed as opposed to No Way Home and Doctor Strange, where you have these moments where there's a pause so the crowd could, react, and then they continue playing the movie. So that's a little weird when you're just rewatching it, not in the theater for those moments. But Toby Spider Man, he was great in this movie. I mean, he did. I mean, he shows up a little later, but like we have a lot of Andrew Garfield Spider Man, and this is where a lot of people fell in love with his version of Spider Man because of this movie. And although I think Toby Spider Man, they did pretty good with the callbacks and stuff, and they did good with him being a little bit more of a mentor to MCU Spider Man, where he's telling Peter we got to cure all of them, and he's telling him not to kill Green Goblin because not only he doesn't want Peter to go down that wrong path, but he also he has the opportunity to prevent a mistake that has been haunting him for the entire Raimi trilogy, which is not preventing Norman Osborn from dying by the glider. And then he's able to stop it. But I would be lying that yes, Toby had some great moments. Toby was good in the movie. Andrew was amazing. Pun intended, because they gave Andrew so many great moments. It was almost as if this movie was kind of the redemption to Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. Like, him killing Gwen Stacy by accident by snapping her neck. He's able to redeem himself by catching MJ for his other version of himself. Or at least how Andrew Garfield says it, he's able to save his younger brother's girlfriend. Or like he's able to save him for his younger brother. Or the iconic scene where he's like, I love you guys. And then they don't say I love you back. But I know Miles would have came in there, he would have been like, you gotta say I love you back. You gotta say I love you back. But anyways, the whole scene where they're all running and they're swinging. I mean, they're swinging together, and the first time seeing it's still surreal. Like when I watched that moment, I'm like, holy shit, they actually did that. They actually united all three Spider-Men together. Like that's still oh my god, they actually did that. Like, oh wow, they actually did it. Like that's a moment where you just look back. Like that scene will never get old for me. Like where they're all three running and then they swing together. They land on the Statue of Liberty head. Iconic. And the whole scene of them fighting off the villains at the end was great. Obviously, you had a bunch of other cameos like Matt Murdock, but Matt Murdock didn't really even have an appearance in the movie. And at the end, where Doctor Strange erases everybody's mind of forgetting who Peter is, and the score went crazy. I would say out of all three movies, this is the best that the score has ever been. And the score is pretty good in both movies, but it was amazing in this movie, especially the scene where he kind of leaves Mary Jane. I keep saying Mary Jane, even though they call her Watson in this movie, but she's not Mary Jane. But when he leaves MJ and Ned, and then everybody kind of forgets that they actually don't even forget that he's Spider-Man. They just forget Peter Parker even exists, which is kind of drastic. I think it would have been better if they just made it to where everybody just forgot Peter was Spider-Man, which includes everybody in his life forgets that he's Spider-Man instead of the whole world forgetting Peter Parker. I think that would have, I don't know. I don't know the rules for magic, but whatever. But at the end, he's resetted. He's by himself. He makes a homemade suit, which looks beautiful. And he's swinging in the night alone in the winter. And I thought that was great. I literally, as I said, I think the second half of No Way Home is phenomenal. I think it's one of the top tier. When it's the second half of this movie, it's one of the top tier Spider-Man movies. But the first half, it's a little funky in the beginning, but in the second half, it's able to carry itself. So overall, I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10. So in conclusion, how do I feel about the MCU Spider-Man trilogy? I like the trilogy. I like Homecoming, and I really liked No Way Home, even though I acknowledge both have flaws. But I didn't really like Far From Home that much. But if I was to rank the Spider-Man series so far, this is where I would rank it. Number 1, the Raimi trilogy. The first two are so good. And although the third one's a little meh at the end, it's still a strong throughout the trilogy. Number 2, the MCU Spider-Man trilogy. I really like Homecoming and No Way Home, but I did not really care for Spider-Man Far From Home. And then number 3, this is the Amazing Spider-Man duology. The first one's really good, but man, the second one really just holds it back. Just really holds it back. And that's how I feel about the live-action Spider-Man films. Our last stop in this Spider-Man overview will be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. How will I feel about the movie after all these years? And hopefully, finally, at the end of Spider-Man week, we will get Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse review. Hopefully, I get to see the movie. I'm pretty excited for it. But yeah, coming up next on the overview is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.